Alright guys, we have a fun video today. This is going to be more a video designed to spark discussion rather than a super deep intellectual or organized intellectual analysis or takedown, if you will. Today we're going to be asking the question, is or was Kant a rationalist? Excuse me. I think it'll be fun. We're just going to kind of go through his couple big ideas and render a judgment. A couple disclaimers. Number one, like I say in all my other videos, I'm not an academic philosopher. I'm just a curious guy who likes to read and read good stuff. So I can't give you the ins and outs of Kant's work. If I make a misinterpretation or I go wrong, I am respectfully asking the philosophers in my community to maybe help me out if I'm off the path, because I don't claim to be an expert, and I always want to have, knowledge that's closest to reality, right? Why stick with your, old conceptions if they've proven useless now? I think it's silly. So that's number one. Please help me out. So you can ask, well, if you're not an academic philosopher, how do you know anything about Kant, really? Great question. I'm glad you asked that. That is why I took John David Ebert's German Idealist Philosophy course, which is amazing, which is probably his best one, which is saying something. So between that, we had a section on Kant, we had a section on Fichte, we had a section on Hegel, Schelling, Schopenhauer, and then there's an entire other course on Nietzsche, which was also really great. And so combined with my notes from John's class, I, of course, read The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant, and that section on Kant was just beautiful. I got this idea. So just know I'm not an expert. That's what I'm trying to say. So if I got something wrong, that's why. It probably has less to do with those two and more to do with my own misinterpretation or inadequacy in some way, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Disclaimer number two, also. Yeah, actually, this will be my new disclaimer number two. This is going to be an unorganized video. I got this idea driving home, and I had the time for it, and I was worried I wasn't going to have the time for it later on. So I didn't take any notes, and I think sometimes it can be fun doing a little more unorganized. I think it's a challenge for me to organize my thoughts clearly. So that's number two. Number three, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. You could have constant IQ, and it would probably be... I was going to say double mine. That might be a stretch. Maybe 1.5 mine. I mean, the dude is just... I think Kant... I think Kant is one of the greatest thinkers in Western civilization. I think the dude is just almost too intelligent to the point where I don't think I'd be interested in talking to him on a personal level, but the guy is just insane. I mean, what a mind that is. I just know that if I'm critiquing Kant, which I don't really think I am, it doesn't come from this place of, look how much smarter than I am. No, I have humbled myself before this philosopher master, and I mean that sincerely. The dude is just... I always said, you could put me on Earth for 1,000 years straight, and I would never come close to what he wrote in the Critique of Pure Reason. It's just not even close. He's just a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant man. Final disclaimer will be... Listen, we are seeing the world integrally. We are killing rationalism. So breaking out of the either or, and then we invoke the third aspect of measuring thought to reconcile. Excuse me. So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is just take a balanced look. The point I'm trying to make is I want to make this clear, I am not positing the rationalist binary of either Kant is 100% a rationalist, or he's 100% not a rationalist. That is ridiculous. That is absurd. No, we're not playing this game. So that is to say, they could be a little bit of both, which I don't want to spoil, but that's kind of to give an answer that's dissatisfying to the rationalist. We'll see where I end up. We'll put it that way. Okay. So if there's any other disclaimers, I will think about it in the meantime. So what are some of Kant's main ideas? So number one, I believe in German it's called Verstand. That's what John called it. The understanding. So essentially, again, philosophy guys, correct me if I'm wrong. I'd prefer if you're cool about it, but this is the internet. You don't have to be. Essentially, Kant was trying to reconcile an argument. I think it came from Hume. It came from both Hume and who was the other one? Berkeley, I think it was. I think it was Hume and Berkeley. They essentially rationalize their way into a complete skepticism. Not only can we not know the world, because that's mediated through the senses, and the senses are flawed, but Hume said we can't even know our own mind and thoughts. So philosophy, at least the way Will Durant explains it, was at a very rough moment. Time has an intensity, hey. A very rough moment, because it could have died, and you could see why, obviously. I mean, if it gets to a point where we can't even... My phone, I'm not even sure, it's beyond just this irrational quantum logic. I don't even know it exists. Forget the phone, the object that I call a phone. I mean, if we can't do anything, we might as well just pack it in and commit, like, collective suicide or something. So Kant, a scientist, before a philosopher, apparently read this, and it completely just destroyed him. I mean, he's a scientist. His entire world is the objective world. And now the philosophers are coming into him and saying, no, you don't even have close to objective. As a matter of fact, you are delusional, and you will never know the objective world. This was not going to sit well with Kant. And John told a funny story. Kant, I think, was autistic. I think that's probably fair to say. Maybe I could be wrong. But he seemed autistic. And one of the reasons why is because apparently he used to make a daily walk, like around his... neighborhood or maybe a trail or something, and he would do it to the minute. So every single day at 4:30, let's say, he was there no matter what, autistically dedicated to that. And apparently he was reading a book or something on his walk. I love these stories. These stories are the best when it comes to philosophers. He was like reading a book, or he was reading Hume's philosophy of essentially just complete skepticism, and it essentially almost made him go catatonic like Nietzsche, and it just completely messed up his daily routine. I thought that was the funniest thing ever. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to negate that. He's trying to supersede that, transcend that. He's trying to solve that, whatever word you want to use. So how does he do it? Here's how he does it. Essentially, to put it short, he says that the human mind comes pre-embedded with the categories of space, time, and causality, and as sense data comes in, it goes through these categories and it constructs an image of the object of reflection in question, so the phone. So through these three categories, now I personally, the way this has always been described to me, the word filter comes to my mind. It just kind of blinks red. So I'm going to use filter instead of categories. So essentially, sense data comes in through our sense faculties. It is filtered through the dimensions of space, time, and causality. And as that happens on the other side, we can have a clear understanding of what the world is, that we're here. We're not going to walk off a cliff unless we choose to, or we're doing so accidentally. We can be sure. This is what it is. Space, time, and causality give us assurance that a scientific experience is real and possible. Obviously, you have to follow the scientific method. If you follow the scientific method and you do the right things, you can be sure that when you build the Empire State Building, or, hey, the Twin Towers, that's not going to fall unless either there's a scientific mistake that you have not accounted for, and that will... But that kind of proves my point, doesn't it? Or, of course, you have another force of sufficient mass and speed or whatever that will topple it down. So yes, you can be sure of a scientific experience because the filters of space-time and causality present an image of the object and reflection that is more than sufficient. It is just way more than sufficient. This is how we can confer validity on the manifold of experience. So that's another thing. So what space, time, and causality do, they confer a synthetic unity on the manifold of existence. Now we get to the critique of pure reason. So like I just said, confer unity on the manifold of sense data or sensory experience. That's what space, time, and causality do. Pure reason tries to confer synthetic unity on the filters or categories. Never going to happen. So we have our filters and we have our image, and we are sure that science can be real. Great. So what's the problem? What is the critique of pure reason? I don't understand what the problem is. In constructing an image of my mouse pad of this thing, it raises the obvious question, what would it be like to perceive this thing without the filters of space, time, and causality? Kant doesn't tell you because he's never going to tell you, because no one's going to be able to tell you. And anyone, I personally believe, and admittedly, philosophers, if you think if it's just this is a statement made out of ignorance, like, inform me. I don't want to be ignorant. I think the attempt to do so is rationalism. I think you've gone way lost. Remember, guys, rationality is built upon objectified space. Everything spatial has its limit. Kant just outlined its limit. That's what he's doing. He says, yes, space-time and causality are our vanishing points, essentially. They close and open. Excuse me. And you're essentially never going to be able to figure out what the image of that object looks like without those filters. So, he says in doing this, whether it's Verstand, the understanding, which is what we just talked about, that's not reason, that's not Kant's reason, that's not what he's talking about. Talking about Verstand, the understanding. Either it's Verstand or reason itself. What it does is it posits binaries. Hello, Jean Gebster. Have you heard this before? Maybe you have. It posits these binaries. Now, when I didn't learn this from my course, but Gebster would say, when kept in its place, it's fine, right? It's great. These binaries can be reconciled. But, as Kant lays out, sometimes reason is employed to reconcile metaphysical spiritual binaries that, simply put, cannot be reconciled, whether it's the causality of the universe, or on one hand, there must have been some primordial foundational cause in a physical rational sense to get this chain of existence going. At the same time, you will never be able to posit something that you cannot ask, well, what caused that? And it'll never be able to do it. Think about atoms, right? You can go smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and you perpetually divide and divide and divide until you just pop out of existence. But of course, rationally, you don't pop up out of existence like you're in Honey, I Shrunk My Kids or whatever, or you're in some sci-fi movie. You don't. Rationally, you just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But eventually, you do kind of just pop up out of existence, don't you? Because what is so small, there's no substance there. There's nothing there. And essentially, rationality or reason, as he calls it, simply cannot reconcile these boundaries. So let's do a quick recap. This, as I should have mentioned earlier, this is the argument that Kant is not only an anti-rationalist, but an amazing anti-rationalist. I would agree with this. We'll get there. So why is he an amazing rationalist? Because, as he pointed out, with space, time, and causality, they act as an ordering schema that assigns sense data to our mental faculties. Kind of think of it like communication through mail or letters in a military office, right? You go to the general, hey, I got mail. He's going to say, great. You're going to put in a certain box, a certain cubby, as I used to say in elementary school, and you're going to mark it with all this stuff. Who it's from, when it was sent, when it was delivered, when I should open it maybe, who knows. The point is there's an ordering schema. That's what the Verstand does, and it makes sure, or assures us, that we can be sure that scientific experiences are real and are true, and we can rely on them, which is obvious, by the way. The fact that I'm speaking to you right now is obvious, but the problem with rationalism is they're so rational that they can't see what my 6-year-old nephew can see, which is just common sense. Okay, so what's the problem? Oh, that's right. So we've just undercut the rationalist nonsense of getting lost in your head and dividing and separating and deconstructing and hair splitting to the point of extreme perpetual skepticism. In addition to this, he has also outlined demarcated, if you will, the limits of reason, because reason will never be able to reconcile these spiritual, metaphysical binaries that it posits. What's the problem? How could this possibly be rationalist? Now, if we were to stop there, I think that would be case closed, right? This is the great thing about Kant. It's such a great example of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, at least in this instance. You can be autistically rational and still not be a rationalist, as outlined by Kant. He says, I will be autistically rational in this domain, which is, say, in the quantifiably measurable consciously known. Not at all times, which brings me to my point. My interpretation of that, which I just kind of outlined, and philosophers, correct me if I'm wrong, is not that Kant was saying the metaphysical spiritual side doesn't exist because rationality can't reconcile these binaries. It's that rationality is limited to that. So it's not that God doesn't exist. It's that rationality will never be able to reach him. Here's the problem, and maybe I'm missing something. Whether in academia or just in the more broad culture, it seems to have been inverted, that interpretation. So now they're saying, oh, rationality can't reconcile these amaterial spiritual binaries, therefore the amaterial spiritual binaries don't exist. That seems to be the modern interpretation in our rationalist world, so correct me if I'm wrong on that one. Okay, so pretty amazing argument that Kant is an anti-rationalist. Great. Here's the problem. The categorical imperative. This is a problem. So the categorical imperative, I believe, it seems to me, is Kant's way of attempting to attain a rational, objective code of morality. And the way he does this is essentially, and maybe I'm misinterpreting, he just takes the golden rule, which is a good one, I'll give the Christians that one, the golden rule, and he wraps it in a sort of secular armor, and he expands it. So the way he does this is by saying, act only so that the underlying principle of your action should be universally willed. If I were to steal, let's say I'm living in my conditions. I'm not rich by any means, but I'm very thankful. I'm not worrying about where my next meal comes from. I'm not rich. Don't get any. Don't misunderstand. But I'm not really worried about where my next meal comes from. So if I were to go up to someone and I were to steal from them, completely unnecessarily, maybe say I steal food from them, even worse, I steal it from someone who actually needs that food. Well, think about what you're doing here. So the underlying principle, right? If I can steal because, quite frankly, I'm hungry and I want it, okay, well, if that was universally willed and everyone acted under that principle, would the world be a more moral place or not? Interesting that even the rationalists ultimately deferred to a qualitative valuation. I don't see any reason why the universal willing in itself would necessarily lead to a negative or positive valuation on that universal willing, but that's a topic for another day. But the point is, so of course, if everyone were to steal just because they were hungry and they wanted to, even if they didn't need to, and they weren't starving or their children weren't starving, the world would be a worse place. So therefore, it's objectively wrong that if you were to do that, you are objectively wrong. There is no getting around it. You are either right or you are wrong. This is Kant. I don't care about your emotions. I don't care about your subjective overlay. There is a right way of doing things objectively and a wrong way of doing things objectively. The problem is obvious. His entire thing. Simply put, our moral contents are quantifiably immeasurable, and they are consciously somewhat known for the most part. We can know their effects in the sense of the feelings and how they affect us, but it's not like we can put them on the table, right? And simply put, people will not agree with his valuation. Remember when I said he ultimately appeals to a valuation because maybe the rationalists don't like this, but I don't really care. I think all of our moral judgments are really qualitative valuations, which is why he ultimately appealed to one. And once you realize that qualitative valuations are inherently going to be a part of this process, you will not get people who agree that stealing is unnecessary or wrong. You just simply won't. So he's a rationalist because he's taking an aspect of the human condition that is fundamentally quantifiably immeasurable, I would argue subjective, and trying to make it quantifiably measurable and objective. That is textbook rationalism. Textbook rationalism. That, I guess, alone wouldn't be rationalism. You doing that, I guess that's fine. You insisting that this is the only way to do it, that's rationalism. And that's what he does with his objective-subjective sort of dichotomy. So, is Kant a rationalist? I hate to give such an unsatisfying answer, but yes and no. We are rejecting the either-or binary insofar as it obscures our ability to see reality unmediated by any sort of projection by the ego. I want straight, pure reality streamlined, injected into my veins, not your projections. So everything depends on what aspect of Kant you're talking about. If you're talking about the Critique of Pure Reason, no, he's not a rationalist in my opinion. Not only that, I think he's one of the greatest anti-rationalists in the history of the world, on a Gebser level of anti-rationalism. When it comes to the categorical imperative, try to say that 5 times fast, I think he is, because like I said, he's trying to quantifiably measure and objectify a quantifiably immeasurable subjective aspect of the human condition. So that's kind of all I really had to it. Hopefully it will generate some discussion, and let me know. Also, really good point. I have to remember to mention this. Someone left a comment on one of my Gebser videos like months ago, and he was saying how, as great as Gebser is, there's a worry that when you read Gebser, there's a tendency to dismiss rationalist philosophers, and we can call them that. I don't mean to put that in quotes sarcastically. Maybe rationalists. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say Kant's a rationalist, just for the sake of argument. The commenter didn't make this claim that Gebser was dismissing Kant, but I think what he's saying is, take me for example. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a philosopher or academic. If I read Gebser, there is a danger of me dismissing Kant. Now, Gebser, of course, wouldn't dismiss Kant. Gebser would refute Kant, and Kant wouldn't dismiss Gebser, or Kant would refute Gebser. This is what the brightest minds do. But me, maybe as someone who hasn't read the Critique of Pure Reason, and maybe I'm reading Gebser, I might say, oh, Kant, he's just a rationalist. There's nothing you can get from him. I would be very careful if I were you. When you get to a point where you're dismissing Immanuel Kant, you might need to kill the ego to save the self. This isn't to say that Gebser's point here about potential rationalism isn't valid. I would be very careful when you get to a point where you're dismissing these guys. That's ego. I would never dismiss Kant, ever. even with Gebser's teachings on rationalism, if he came back from the dead and he wanted to talk about this stuff, I might avoid it because I'm worried he'd embarrass me, but I'm not going to dismiss him. I'm not going to be like, sorry, you're an idiot, you're a rash. That's never going to happen. So you always want to be careful. As amazing, philosophy in many ways, it has the same limitations as the 3D rationalist stuff. I pity the man who does not take that seriously, though. That's a dangerous game. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, my friend. That's not going to be good. So yeah, I love you guys. You guys are the best. Please let me know what you guys think of my sort of opinion. Again, philosopher guys, if you want to correct me, please. I always want to be as close to accuracy as possible. So once again, shout out to John David Ebert for his amazing courses. Please go buy and purchase his German Idealist Philosophy course. It is amazing. It's where I got all this stuff. And I love you. I'll see you soon. Thank you, guys.